What offer did a billionaire make that a struggling father still refused? When every expert walked away from the billionaire's daughter, the world thought her case was hopeless, until a quiet single father stepped forward and did what no one else could. It happened on a night meant for glitz and power, when a child broke down in front of hundreds, and the only person who understood her wasn't a doctor, a therapist, or a nanny, just a man washing dishes in the back room. What no one knew was that this moment would pull two families together, expose a hidden betrayal, and prove that sometimes the person everyone overlooks is exactly the one a child has been waiting for. The clang of steel trays and the hiss of industrial dishwashers filled the back kitchen of the Grand Meridian Hotel, a five-star palace of marble floors and chandeliers that Marcus Hill only ever saw from the service hallways. He stood over a sink of steaming water, sleeves rolled to his elbows, scrubbing the last of the pans from the gala's first course. His muscles ached from the night shift, but the quiet rhythm of work kept his mind steady. It was better than thinking about the letter from his mother-in-law or the way Caleb had folded into himself that morning, hands pressed to his ears as the train thundered past their apartment. A sudden scream sliced through the hotel's vaulted ceilings. Not the startled kind. This was sharp, piercing, the sound of a child in real distress. The kitchen froze. A server dropped a stack of plates. Someone whispered, "Not again." Before his mind could catch up, Marcus's feet were already moving. He pushed through the double doors into the gold-lit hallway, ignoring the sous chef calling after him. The closer he got to the ballroom, the louder the noise grew. Shouts, commands, the frantic shuffle of bodies trying to solve a problem they didn't understand. When he stepped into the gala, the world narrowed to a single point. A small girl in a white dress lay curled on the marble near the stage, her hands clamped over her head, her body rocking in short, panicked bursts. Dozens of guests backed away, cameras raised like a forest of blinking eyes. 3 nannies hovered helplessly, calling her name in bright, brittle voices that only made her shrink further into herself. A spotlight from above washed her in cold white, and every time it flickered, she flinched like someone had struck her. Marcus felt his breath catch. He had seen this before. Not here, not on polished marble surrounded by million-dollar jewelry, but in a tiny apartment in Oakland, where a little boy trembled at the sound of a garbage truck, his own son, his Caleb. The air around him seemed to mute. He didn't hear the guests, the music abruptly cut off, or the nannies arguing with hotel staff. All he saw was a child drowning in noise and light. A security guard spotted him. "Sir, step back. Staff stays against the wall." But Marcus kept walking, slow and deliberate, hands visible, shoulders relaxed. Running or yelling would only make her spiral faster. He knew this. He had lived this. "Sir!" the guard barked, moving to intercept him. Marcus shook his head once. "She doesn't need more people shouting." The guard hesitated, not convinced, but thrown off enough for Marcus to slip past him. He lowered himself onto the floor about 10 feet from the girl, turning his body slightly so he wasn't facing her head-on. He kept his hands in his lap, palms open, breathing slow and steady. He wasn't here to fix her. He wasn't here to touch her. He was here to be still. The crowd hushed, confused. The nannies whispered, "Who is that? Someone call security." Marcus didn't look at them. At Poisson, he let his voice soften into the same low rhythm he used with Caleb in their darkest moments. 10, 9, 8. He didn't force the words, didn't push them toward her. He released each number into the air like a drifting feather. The girl's cries stuttered, then sharpened again as a camera flash went off. But when Marcus continued, 7, 6, 5, something fragile began to shift. The rocking slowed. Her fingers loosened. She turned her head the smallest degree, just enough to see the outline of a man sitting calm in the chaos. 4, 3, Guests leaned forward, mesmerized. The nannies froze. A server clasped her hands to her mouth. 2, 1. Marcus extended one hand, not touching, not reaching, just offering. For 3 long seconds, nothing moved. Not the crowd, not the child, not even Marcus's breath. Then, with a trembling motion that looked more like instinct than choice, the girl crawled forward and placed her tiny hand in his. The ballroom exhaled. The lights dimmed as someone finally realized what had been making things worse. The music remained off. One of the nannies sank to her knees, tears streaking her perfect makeup. Marcus didn't smile, didn't speak. He simply held her hand the way he had held Caleb's so many nights, steady, warm, patient. The girl's breathing evened. Her shoulders dropped. A small, startled peace washed over her features, as if she had been fighting a storm alone and finally found shelter. Then another presence entered the room. High heels clicked sharply across the marble, each step cutting through the stunned silence. A woman in a tailored black gown approached, the kind of presence that could freeze a boardroom or command an empire with a single sentence. Ava Kensington, the billionaire behind Kensington Technologies, the youngest female CEO in Silicon Valley, and the mother of the little girl now leaning gently against Marcus's knee. She stopped in front of him, her breath catching when she saw her daughter's face. Calm, no longer trapped in the spiral she'd been in for months. The crowd watched, waiting to see what the powerful woman would do. Ava didn't speak. Not at first. She looked from Marcus to her daughter, then back to him, a million unspoken questions flickering in her eyes. Who are you? How did you do that? Why did my child choose you? But the only words she managed were quiet, almost disbelieving. What's your name? Marcus opened his mouth to answer, and the scene held there, suspended, a moment between 2 worlds colliding. A billionaire's daughter finally at peace, a quiet black father who had walked into chaos without asking for anything, and an entire ballroom wondering how a man no one noticed had just done what every expert had failed to do. But long before the chandeliers and the sharp click of Ava Kensington's heels, Marcus Hill had already lived an entire day's worth of exhaustion. That morning, the world had felt too loud from the moment he opened his eyes. The apartment walls in East Oakland were thin, trembling each time the commuter trains barreled past. Before sunrise, one thundered by with a metallic roar that shuddered through the floorboards. Moments later, he heard soft feet shuffle across the hallway. Caleb. Marcus found his son sitting on the carpet in the living room, knees pulled into his chest, palms pressed tightly against his ears. His small body rocked in a rhythm Marcus knew too well, a rhythm born of panic buried under quiet. "It's okay, buddy," Marcus murmured, lowering himself beside him. He didn't touch him at first. Contact too early could make things worse. He simply breathed slow, long breaths, letting the air settle between them. Caleb's breaths were shallow, fast, like a bird trapped in a storm. Marcus extended 3 fingers. 3, 2, 1. When he reached 0, he gently touched Caleb's chest. Steady pressure, grounding, the same gesture he had used the first time his son's world had collapsed in noise. Slowly, Caleb blinked, his body unlocking by degrees. He looked up with those wide, earnest eyes that always seemed to apologize for needing more than the world was willing to give. "You're okay," Marcus whispered. "I'm right here." Caleb leaned against him, small but trusting. And every time that trust came with a flicker of fear in Marcus's chest. Fear of losing him, fear of failing him, fear of not being enough. The knock came an hour later, sharp, impatient. Marcus opened the door to find his mother-in-law, Denise, already shaking her head like she'd walked into a disaster. "Another episode?" Marcus, this is exactly why I keep saying he needs a structured home, a real home. Her eyes slid past him, searching the apartment for proof of inadequacy. Denise, he said quietly. He's calming down now. But for how long? You work nights. You sleep in shifts. You barely manage the rent. Marcus, I loved my daughter, but she wouldn't want her child struggling like this. The words landed like stones. There was no cruelty in her tone, just the cold certainty of someone who believed she was right. She lowered her voice. I'm filing for custody. I've already spoken to a lawyer. The hallway tilted for a moment. Marcus swallowed hard. You think I'm not doing everything I can? I think love isn't enough, she replied. Not for a child like Caleb. When she walked away, Marcus stood frozen, the echo of her footsteps mixing with the low rumble of another distant train. He shut the door, leaned against it, and closed his eyes. He wasn't angry at her. He was terrified she might be right. By noon, he was racing the clock, dropping Caleb at his specialized program on 21st Street, packing his worn chef whites into his backpack, and catching the BART train to San Francisco. He kept one hand braced on the metal pole, the other clutching the railing above him, watching the city blur past the windows. His reflection looked tired, dark circles under steady eyes, a jaw clenched against the weight of survival. Nobody on that train would ever guess that he could anchor a child in the middle of a storm. When he arrived at the Grand Meridian Hotel, the lobby glimmered with gold trim and polished stone. Staff bustled around him, barely sparing him a glance. To them, he was part of the machinery, uniformed, replaceable, invisible. Marcus, you're late, the sous chef barked as he slipped into the kitchen. Yes, chef, won't happen again. If you want to keep this job, it better not. He nodded, swallowing the frustration already lodged in his throat. It was easier to stay quiet, easier to remain the man nobody noticed. Hours later, after plating hors d'oeuvres for people whose shoes cost more than his monthly rent, Marcus finally stepped into the back kitchen to wash the last racks of pans. His hands had gone numb from hot water and metal edges. That was when the scream erupted, and for the first time all day, Marcus didn't hesitate. He ran, past the chef yelling his name, past the linen carts, past the carved wooden doors opening into the ballroom. He ran toward the sound no one else understood. And now, standing there in the aftermath, Lily Kensington's small hand curled in his, cameras lowered in stunned silence, Marcus became aware of hundreds of eyes finally seeing him. Not as a worker, not as a background figure, not as a man barely holding his life together, but as someone who had reached a child no one else could reach. A murmur rippled through the guests. The security guard who'd tried to stop him stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene or step back. The nannies watched with a mixture of awe and wounded pride. Ava Kensington held his gaze longer than anyone. Her expression was unreadable, but behind the practiced composure lay something raw, hope mixed with disbelief, and something else he couldn't name. She took one slow step toward him. Whatever you just did, she said quietly, no one has ever done before. Marcus felt Lily's tiny fingers wrap tighter around his own. He looked down at her, then back at her mother. I just saw a kid who needed someone to stop the noise, he murmured. Tomorrow, Ava replied, voice steady but shaken. My office. 9 a.m. It wasn't a question. Marcus blinked. He wanted to protest, wanted to remind her he was staff, just a cook, not someone who belonged in a billionaire's office. But the way she said it left no room for argument. The crowd slowly parted, creating a path between Marcus and the hotel exit. And as he stood, lifting Lily gently to her feet before handing her to her trembling nanny, he felt the weight of something shifting, something larger than the moment, something that reached into the deepest, trembling places of his life. When he finally stepped back, Lily looked at him with wide, watery eyes, not scared, not lost, recognizing him. A man no one noticed, except for the one child who needed him most. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus wondered if being invisible had been the thing that prepared him for exactly this moment. The ballroom lights dimmed further as staff rushed to regain control of the shaken event. But Marcus barely registered any of it. His heartbeat was steady now, grounding him in a way the world rarely allowed. Lily Kensington's tiny fingers still rested against his palm like a fragile promise, and the hush around them grew deeper, almost reverent. People seemed afraid that the slightest noise might break whatever miracle they had just witnessed. The nanny closest to Lily reached out timidly, as if approaching a wild bird she didn't want to startle. "Sweetheart, sweetheart, come here, please." Her voice trembled. Even she knew she wasn't the one the child needed right now. But Lily didn't move. She remained glued beside Marcus, her small shoulder brushing lightly against his knee. Her breathing, shaky, uneven just moments earlier, had settled into a slow, tentative rhythm, like someone relearning how to trust the air around her. Marcus swallowed hard. He wasn't a therapist, not a specialist, not anyone with authority. He was a night shift line cook who spent more nights than he could count whispering calm into the dark for a little boy who struggled in ways he didn't always have words for. Everything he knew came from love, desperation, and 1,000 failed attempts at figuring out what would bring Caleb back from the edge. But somehow, in this glittering room filled with experts and millionaires, that was the thing that worked. Ava Kensington stepped closer, her gown brushing the marble. She knelt, slow, controlled, like someone afraid any sudden movement would shatter the fragile peace. Her eyes were locked on her daughter, wide with something rawer than fear. Lily had not let anyone near her during an episode in months. Not the therapists, not the nannies, not even her mother. "Lily," Ava whispered, her voice cracking at the edges. "Baby, look at me." There was a pause. Long, fragile. Then Lily turned her head, just barely, toward her mother's voice. A gasp rippled through the room. Ava covered her mouth with both hands. For a fraction of a second, her composure, her famously indestructible composure, crumbled. Marcus saw the exhaustion underneath, the guilt, the haunted look of a parent wondering every single day if she was doing everything wrong. But Lily took one step back, not toward her mother, toward Marcus. And just like that, the connection reformed. He didn't reach for her. He didn't speak. He simply lowered his hand again, offering presence instead of instruction. Lily placed her hand in his with a certainty that sent a soft, stunned murmur through the guests. One of the security guards whispered to another, "What the hell? How?" A photographer lowered his camera entirely, forgetting his job. A woman in pearls clasped her husband's arm and blinked back tears. The room wasn't watching a meltdown anymore. They were witnessing a child find the one place in a chaotic world where she felt understood, next to a man nobody saw coming. Ava finally rose to her feet, straightening her shoulders, rebuilding her armor piece by piece. When she looked at Marcus again, her expression had changed. Gone was the distant executive mask. In its place was something far more vulnerable and far more dangerous. Hope. Hope, when placed in the wrong person, could destroy lives. Hope placed in the right one could change them completely. "Tell me your name," she said quietly. "Marcus," he replied. "Marcus Hill." Ava nodded slowly, absorbing the name like it mattered, like it would matter for a long time. "I'm taking her upstairs," she said to the staff, but her eyes remained on Marcus. "You stay where you are." Two security guards moved toward him, unsure whether stay meant guard him or not touch him. Ava shot them a glance sharp enough to slice steel. No one removes him from this room. That was the first time the night shifted. The first time the balance of power tilted, not toward money, not toward authority, but toward the quiet man on the marble floor who had done the impossible. Lily finally released his hand, though she lingered near him before a nanny coaxed her away with the gentleness of someone afraid of losing her job. The moment Lily left his fingertips, something inside Marcus fluttered with a strange ache, like witnessing a small, fragile connection slip through his grasp. As Ava carried her daughter out, Lily kept looking back over her mother's shoulder, searching the crowd until she found Marcus again. Her eyes were soft, not afraid, not overwhelmed. Seen. The last thing Marcus heard before the ballroom doors closed was Ava's voice, calm but commanding. 9 a.m. tomorrow, my office. He sat there on the cool marble long after the room began to move again, servers resuming their work, guests whispering theories, staff sweeping away the evidence of the chaos. He should have been worried about losing his job, worried about Denise and the custody threat, worried about rent, about Caleb's school, about the 1,000 things pressing against his life every single day. But instead, he could only think of one thing. A child who had chosen him, a billionaire who had noticed him, and a door that had opened into a world he had never been allowed to stand in before. He rose slowly, hands trembling, not with fear but with the uneasy feeling that his life had just pivoted in a direction he wasn't ready for. As he walked back toward the kitchen, a whisper followed him through the grand hallway. "Who is that man?" Marcus didn't have an answer, but for the first time he wondered if maybe, just maybe, the world was finally about to find out. The next morning came too quickly. Marcus barely slept. He kept replaying the scene in the ballroom. Lily's small hand in his, the way the noise of the world seemed to melt when she looked at him. The moment her mother said, "Tomorrow, my office." He'd stood in front of a sink full of dishes at 2 a.m., staring at the faucet as if it might give him advice. By dawn, he knew only one thing for certain. He wasn't ready for whatever was coming. The train ride to San Francisco was quieter than usual. Fog rolled low over the bay, softening the edges of the skyline. Marcus watched the city rise from the blur, all glass towers and cold steel, the kind of place built for people who never worried about rent or keeping their lights on. He smoothed the front of his only decent shirt, the collar frayed but clean. He hoped it made him look like he belonged somewhere other than a kitchen, standing in front of Kensington Technologies headquarters, a 70-story monument of mirrored blue glass. He felt impossibly small. Workers in tailored suits streamed past him, talking into wireless earbuds, never breaking stride. He stepped into the lobby, where everything gleamed: marble floors, a waterfall display wall, and a security desk large enough to be its own planet. The receptionist looked him up and down, not unkindly, but with the detached professionalism of someone who didn't expect to see a man like him asking for the top floor. "Name?" she asked. "Marcus Hill. Ms. Kensington asked me to." Before he could finish, her eyebrows rose. "Oh, one moment." She tapped something into her computer, then picked up a discreet headset. "Mr. Hill is here." Her tone had shifted, curiosity mixed with something like surprise. She handed him a sleek visitor badge. "Take elevator C, penthouse level." Marcus swallowed. Penthouse? People like him weren't supposed to know what penthouse carpet felt like. As the elevator began its ascent, his reflection stared back at him from the mirrored walls. He looked like a man caught between two worlds. Shoes slightly scuffed but neatly polished, shoulders squared even though he still carried last night's exhaustion. When the doors opened, the air changed. Everything smelled faintly of citrus and some expensive flower he didn't know the name of. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay, turning the entire floor into a bright expanse of modern glass and white stone. A woman in a tailored suit, Ava's assistant, approached him. "Miss Kensington is expecting you." Her tone held that same polite caution he heard often when people weren't sure what box to put him in. He followed her through a long corridor lined with minimalist art and quiet humming servers. At the end stood double glass doors. They opened silently. Ava Kensington was already there, silhouetted against the view. She didn't turn immediately. She kept her arms crossed, her gaze steady on the city as if calculating something only she understood. "Mr. Hill," she said finally. He stood straighter. "Yes, ma'am." She turned then, and even though she was dressed simply in a pale blouse and black trousers, she carried the room like a force of nature. There were no signs of last night's panic, no tremor in her voice, no tears. Just the cold brilliance of a woman used to bending the world to her will. But her eyes held the faintest trace of uncertainty. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Marcus sat, careful not to touch anything. Ava opened a tablet, tapping through a series of documents. Her tone was even, but her questions were anything but casual. "Where did you learn to intervene in that moment? Is it a technique you were taught? A method? A protocol?" Marcus blinked. "No, it's just what I do for my son." "Your son," she repeated softly, as if cataloging the information. "Caleb," Marcus said. "He has sensory processing challenges. When the world gets too loud, I have to find ways to bring him back. Sometimes counting helps. Sometimes silence does." Ava studied him with the focus of someone examining a rare and delicate artifact. "The specialists I've hired, Harvard, Stanford, Johns Hopkins, none of them have been able to reach Lily in over 6 months, she said. She flinches when someone gets within 5 feet. She refuses touch. She shuts down. But she walked to you." "I don't know why," Marcus said quietly. "I just saw a child in trouble." Ava let out a slow breath, as if she'd been holding it since last night. Then she slid a folder across the desk. "This is an employment contract," she said. "A position designed for you, Lily's personal interaction specialist. The salary is 10 times what you're making now. Full benefits, housing allowance if needed." Marcus stared at the document but didn't reach for it. "I can't," he said. For the first time, Ava's composure cracked. Not anger, but genuine confusion. "Why not?" Marcus hesitated. The truth wasn't flattering. It wasn't polished. But it was real. "My mother-in-law is suing for custody of my son. If I take on a job with this many hours, this much responsibility, I'll be giving her ammunition. She'll argue I'm choosing someone else's child over my own." A flicker of something sharp crossed Ava's face. Annoyance? Sympathy? He couldn't tell. "You're refusing because you're a devoted father," she said slowly. "Do you hear yourself? That is exactly why I want you." "It's not that simple," Marcus whispered. Ava stepped around the desk, leaning against its edge, her gaze meeting his on level ground. "What if," she said, "you didn't have to choose?" Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" "What if Caleb came here? What if you brought him with you? We have quiet rooms, therapists, specialists, tutors, anything he needs. And my legal team can assist you with the custody case." His breath caught. This wasn't a job offer. It was a lifeline disguised as one. "Why would you do that?" he asked, not trusting what he heard. Ava's face softened, barely, but enough to reveal a truth she usually hid. "Because I have tried everything," she said. "And the only time my daughter has looked like herself was when she was with you." Silence filled the room, warm and heavy. Marcus looked out at the glittering bay, the world that had never belonged to him. and then back at the woman whose world had cracked the moment a small child reached for a stranger's hand. For the first time, he saw not the billionaire, not the CEO, not the woman the media worshipped and feared. He saw a mother, lost, desperate, fighting for her child. Just like him. He exhaled slowly. "Okay," he said. "Let's talk." And with that single sentence, the ground beneath both their lives began to shift, quietly, irrevocably. But by the time Marcus stepped out of the Kensington building and into the bright mid-morning sun, that brief feeling of possibility had already begun to unravel. The world outside was louder than the calm inside Ava's office. The rush of buses braking, horns blaring from delivery vans, sidewalk chatter rising and falling like ocean waves. He took a slow breath, the way he'd trained himself to when life threatened to tilt. Ava's offer still echoed in his mind. Salary multiplied, full support, therapists, tutors, legal help, a path forward. It sounded like the kind of opportunity people prayed for. Yet all he could think about was Caleb. As he walked toward the BART station, he pulled out his phone. One missed call from Denise. No voicemail. She didn't need to leave messages. Her silence said enough. He boarded the train, gripping the metal pole as it lurched forward. His reflection in the window looked like a man split down the middle, one part awestruck by yesterday's miracle, another terrified of what accepting this new path might cost. At Caleb's school, the afternoon sunlight spilled across the small courtyard, where children lined up to meet their parents. Marcus spotted his son instantly, hood pulled tight, fingers fidgeting with the zipper, eyes scanning the ground instead of the crowd. When Caleb finally lifted his gaze and saw him, the corners of his mouth twitched upward in that small, quiet way that meant everything. "Hey, buddy," Marcus murmured, kneeling to meet him at eye level. "Good day?" Caleb shrugged. "It was loud," he whispered. Marcus nodded in understanding. Loud could mean anything. A pencil dropped, a passing siren, a chair scraped too hard. He brushed his thumb gently against Caleb's sleeve. "Let's go home. Leftover mac and cheese, okay?" Another shrug, but a softer one. In Caleb language, that was a yes. They spent the evening on the couch, the TV on low volume playing an animated show Caleb had memorized every line of. Marcus sat beside him, but his mind kept drifting, back to the girl in the ballroom, to Ava's steady gaze, to the folder she'd pushed across the desk. A new life, laid out on crisp white paper. But one sentence from earlier kept replaying like a warning bell. "My mother-in-law is suing for custody." If he changed even one thing about their schedule, their home routine, their fragile stability, Denise would use it against him. He knew she would. She believed she was doing the right thing, but the law didn't care about good intentions. It cared about evidence. And Ava Kensington's world was too bright, too loud, too public. One wrong picture, one misinterpreted moment, and Denise would claim he was prioritizing someone else's child over his own. That night, after Caleb finally fell asleep curled around his stuffed elephant, Marcus stayed awake at the kitchen table, staring at the contract Ava had emailed him. The screen glowed in the dark apartment, like a door into a different universe. One with money, structure, safety, help he'd never dared ask for. But everything came with a price. The next morning, he returned to Kensington Tower. He rehearsed what he needed to say the entire elevator ride up, feeling the weight of his choice settle deep in his chest. Ava was already in her office, dressed in a navy blazer, hair pulled back tight. She looked like someone who had rehearsed an argument of her own. "Marcus," she said, rising when he entered, "I'm glad you came." He didn't sit. "I can't take the job." The words hit the room with a quiet finality. Ava's expression didn't break, but something behind her eyes wavered. Slowly, she lowered herself back into her seat. Explain it to me, she said, her voice restrained but steady. It's not just a schedule change, Mosaton, Marcus answered. It's everything. If I work these hours in this kind of environment, my mother-in-law will claim I'm choosing another child. She's already got a lawyer, already building a case. This job, it'll help Lily. I know that. But it might cost me my son. Ava folded her hands on the desk, her nails tapping once, sharply. You think I'm asking you to sacrifice your family? I think, Marcus said, that I can't afford to take risks. Not right now. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the hum of the air vents and the faint noise of distant traffic several dozen floors below. Then Ava's tone changed, less commanding, more deliberate. Marcus, I don't extend offers lightly, and I certainly don't extend them twice. She paused. But I've built entire companies by refusing to accept limits. So forgive me if I'm not ready to let this conversation end. Marcus stayed quiet, unsure where she was going. What if, she said again, you didn't have to choose between Lily and Caleb? She leaned forward. Bring him here. Bring Caleb to the estate. He can stay with you during your work hours. We have private tutors, quiet rooms, behavioral specialists. I'll cover the cost of his therapy. And as for custody, she exhaled slowly. My legal team has handled cases more complex than this. Let me help you. For several heartbeats, Marcus couldn't speak. Because this wasn't charity. This wasn't pity. This was Ava Kensington, a woman who commanded world markets, rewriting the rules of her world just to make room for him. He forced himself to shake his head. I don't need saving, he said softly. This isn't about saving you, Ava replied. This is about saving Lily. And right now you are the only person who has reached her in months. Marcus looked down at his worn-out shoes, at the scuff marks along the side. A lifetime of being overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. All of it had taught him to expect doors to close, not open. And here she was, building one just for him. But he wasn't ready to step through it. Not yet. I just need time, he whispered. Ava studied him for a long, searching moment. Then she nodded once. You have 48 hours, she said. After that, I will need an answer. Marcus walked out feeling the weight of two worlds pressing on his shoulders. The life he knew and the life he wasn't sure he deserved. One thing was certain. Whatever choice he made next would change everything. And for the first time, change didn't only feel dangerous. It felt possible. 2 days later, Marcus stood at the gated entrance of the Kensington estate, Caleb's small hand resting inside his own. Morning fog lifted slowly over the hills of Palo Alto, revealing the sprawling glass and stone mansion that shimmered like something from a world he had no vocabulary for. Caleb stared up at it with wide eyes, the kind that signaled both wonder and the early flicker of sensory overload. It's big, Caleb whispered. It is, Marcus said gently, but we're taking it one step at a time, just like always. The gate buzzed, then opened. A black SUV rolled down the drive, and Ava stepped out, not in a gown or a boardroom suit, but in a pale sweater and flats, hair pulled back loosely. For the first time since he'd met her, she looked less like a CEO and more like a tired mother trying to hold herself together. Good morning, Marcus, she said. Then she knelt, eye level with Caleb. Hello, Caleb. I'm Ava. Caleb didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. For him, that was progress. Inside, the estate felt less like a home and more like a sanctuary built to withstand storms. Soft lighting, wide, quiet hallways, a staff that moved gently, deliberately. Someone on Ava's team had clearly studied sensory-friendly design. This way, Ava said. She led them to a room tucked in the far wing of the house, a space with padded walls in muted colors, a dimmable skylight, soft carpet, shelves of neatly arranged objects. At the center sat a little girl with dark curls and a white cotton dress. Lily. She was tracing patterns on the floor again. Circles layered over circles, spirals folding into themselves. A quiet ritual in a world too sharp for her senses. The moment she sensed movement, she froze. Her head lifted. Her eyes found Marcus. Something inside her eased, almost imperceptibly. Her fingers loosened, her breath softened. She didn't smile. She wasn't ready. But something opened in her gaze. Recognition. Then she noticed Caleb, and the air changed. Caleb, uncertain, edged behind Marcus. He wasn't used to new children, not used to new spaces. His fingers fidgeted at the seams of his sleeves. "It's okay, buddy," Marcus murmured. "Just look. You don't have to do anything." Ava watched from behind the observation glass. Breath held the way only parents of sensitive children understood, afraid to hope too much. For a while, nothing happened. Caleb sat in one corner, knees tucked close, eyes scanning the room. Lily sat in the opposite corner, tracing her invisible loops. Neither acknowledged the other. Neither seemed aware of the other's world. Yet something about the room felt aligned. Marcus didn't interfere. He simply sat between them, not a barrier, not a bridge, just a steady presence. When Caleb's breathing hitched, Marcus tapped the floor softly, grounding him with a rhythm only they understood. When Lily grew restless, he adjusted the lighting with a remote until the edges of the room softened. Minutes passed, then an hour. Then something subtle began to unfold. Caleb began arranging a set of wooden blocks into a pattern, straight lines, deliberate symmetry. He worked slowly, his brow furrowed in concentration. Lily watched him out of the corner of her eye, her tracing hand pausing mid-air. She shifted closer, not by much, just an inch at a time. Movements barely noticeable, but every inch was a miracle. When she reached the halfway mark across the room, she stopped. She lifted a block from a nearby pile, blue, smooth, perfectly shaped, and held it out, not to Marcus, to Caleb. The little boy looked at the block, then at her, then at Marcus. Marcus nodded softly. "You can take it, buddy." Caleb reached out, his fingers brushing hers. Lily didn't flinch. She didn't recoil, she didn't shut down. She simply placed the block in his palm and sat beside him on the floor, watching him add it to his pattern. It was the quietest connection Marcus had ever witnessed. Two children, both overwhelmed by a world that demanded too much of them, finding each other without a single word. Ava exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding, her hand pressed to the observation glass, her eyes glistening. "She's never done that," she whispered. "Not with anyone." Marcus watched Lily lean toward Caleb, her shoulder almost touching his. He watched Caleb shift, not away, but closer, and felt something warm rise in his chest. "Kids like them," he said softly, not taking his eyes off the pair. "Sometimes speak a language the rest of us missed." Ava turned toward him. "And you understand it." "I try," Marcus said. "I've had to." Ava lowered her gaze, something fragile flickering beneath her polished exterior. "When Lily was diagnosed," she murmured, "I threw everything at the problem. Experts, programs, technology, protocols." Her voice broke slightly. "But I never thought to simply watch her. Not the way you watch Caleb. Not the way you watched her last night." Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't. Not without revealing how heavy his own fears were. How many nights he'd held Caleb through storms of sensory overload. How often he'd felt like he was failing. But right now wasn't about failure. It was about two small children and a stone-gray block they'd chosen to share in a world too loud for both of them. Caleb picked up the blue block again, studied it, then placed it gently in front of Lily. Her lips parted, just a little, the closest thing she had to a smile. Ava pressed her hand harder against the glass. "Marcus," she whispered, "whatever this is, it's working." He nodded, though inside he felt both awe and fear. Awe at what he was witnessing, fear at what might come next, because anything this fragile could be broken. But right now, in this quiet room far from the chaos of the world outside, two children had found a rhythm, a language without words. And Marcus knew he would do anything to protect it, because sometimes the quietest miracles were the ones people needed most, even if the world wasn't ready to believe in them yet. But miracles, no matter how gentle, cast shadows. And in the Kensington estate, one particular shadow had been watching everything. Ethan Kensington. He stood at the far end of the hallway outside the sensory room, hands tucked neatly into the pockets of his tailored suit, jaw clenched in a way that revealed exactly how little he enjoyed being upstaged. While Ava and Marcus observed Lily and Caleb through the glass, Ethan remained behind just far enough to go unnoticed, but close enough to catch every important detail. His eyes were sharp, restless, scanning the subtle body language between the two children and the quiet man who had stepped out of nowhere. Marcus Hill, a line cook from Oakland. A nobody, as Ethan's mind framed it, intruding into Kensington matters that were never meant to leave the boardroom. Ethan had spent years cultivating the perfect image, steady, logical, unshakably loyal to the Kensington brand. But inside, resentment simmered. He had always been the one cleaning up behind Ava's brilliance, the one smoothing over investor anxieties, the one holding together the framework while she dazzled the world. But now she was distracted. Worse, she was hopeful, and that made her vulnerable. And vulnerability, in a family like theirs, was dangerous. Later that afternoon, after the children had completed their quiet session, Ava invited Marcus to join her in the study, a room lined with mahogany shelves, floor-to-ceiling windows, and an angular fireplace that crackled softly despite the warm day outside. "You did well today," Ava said, pouring 2 cups of tea. She pushed one toward Marcus. "Thank you." Marcus nodded, feeling humbled by the luxury of being thanked by someone of her stature. "They did it, not me." A faint smile crossed Ava's lips. "That humility, that's exactly why Lily trusts you." Before Marcus could answer, the study door opened without a knock. Ethan stepped inside. "Sorry to interrupt," he said smoothly, though his expression suggested he wasn't sorry at all. "I just needed a word." Ava's shoulders stiffened. "Make it quick." Ethan's gaze flicked toward Marcus, lingering 1 second longer than courtesy required. "Privately," he added. Ava's lips pressed into a thin line. She turned to Marcus. "Would you mind waiting in the hall?" "Of course," Marcus said gently. He stood, giving her a respectful nod before stepping out and closing the study doors behind him. The moment the latch clicked, Ethan dropped his polished tone. "Ava," he hissed, "what exactly are you doing?" Ava didn't answer right away. Instead, she crossed her arms and leaned against her desk, meeting his stare with icy calm. "Helping my daughter," Ethan scoffed. "Helping? By bringing in an unqualified stranger? By letting some kitchen worker into our home?" The last words came out sharp, tinged with something uglier than annoyance. Ava's eyes narrowed. "Marcus is not some kitchen worker." He reached Lily. "Something none of your recommended specialists managed." "Luck," Ethan snapped. "Coincidence. Nothing more." "You weren't there," Ava answered. "You didn't see her eyes last night." For the first time in months, she connected. Ethan paced, tugging at the cuff of his sleeve. What about optics, Ava? What about our shareholders? The board? Do you know how reckless this makes you look? Bringing a stranger into a delicate situation? Ava's voice hardened. This is my daughter, Ethan, not a brand strategy. And yet, Ethan replied, stepping closer, I'm the one who has to answer when the board asks why you're letting emotions cloud your judgment. Ava froze. Cloud my judgment? You're desperate, Ethan said simply. Everyone sees it. A sting of truth flashed through her, but she didn't show it. My desperation, she said coldly, comes from loving my child, something you wouldn't understand. The air thickened. For a moment, Ethan's mask cracked, just a hairline fracture, revealing a sharp flare of jealousy. Well, he said tightly, if you won't think of the consequences, I will. He straightened his jacket, recomposed himself, and strode out of the study. Marcus discreetly stepped aside as Ethan passed him in the hallway, but Ethan didn't acknowledge him, didn't even look at him. He simply walked by with the rigid posture of someone used to walking above others without noticing the ground beneath his feet. When Marcus returned to the study, Ava was standing at the window, her reflection indistinguishable from the glass. You okay? He asked softly. She nodded, though her throat moved with the swallow of swallowed emotion. Ethan means well, she said, but he believes control fixes everything, including people. Marcus thought about Caleb. How many well-meaning people had tried to fix him instead of seeing him? Kids don't need fixing, Marcus said quietly. They need understanding. Ava turned toward him, a deep vulnerability slipping through her usually composed exterior. I'm trying, she whispered. God, I'm trying, but I feel like I'm failing at every turn. You're not failing, Marcus said. You're learning. The words softened something inside her. From the hallway, faint laughter bubbled, Caleb and Lily, playing side by side in a way that felt effortless, natural, impossible only weeks ago. Ava breathed out, her shoulders easing for the first time that day. Thank you, she murmured, for all of this. But neither of them noticed the shadow lingering farther down the hall. Ethan had stopped walking, and though he appeared to be checking his phone, his eyes reflected something cold and calculating. He watched the two children through the open door, watched Ava and Marcus standing side by side, watched the fragile beginnings of trust blossoming in a home built on pressure. He straightened his tie, expression hollow. If she won't see the danger, he muttered under his breath, I'll make it visible. Because in Ethan's world, no miracle came without a price, and no outsider was allowed to rewrite the Kensington story. The shift from quiet progress to silent danger happened so slowly that neither Ava nor Marcus noticed the tightening of the strings Ethan had begun to pull. Days passed with Lily and Caleb settling into a rhythm, small victories, gentle breakthroughs, shared moments that felt almost sacred. Ava watched them like someone rediscovering hope, and Marcus found himself walking into the Kensington estate each morning with a cautious but growing sense of belonging. But every time Marcus entered, Ethan was watching. Every time Marcus spoke, Ethan was listening. Every moment of progress became another mark on Ethan's mental ledger, a threat growing larger. One Thursday morning, as sunlight filtered through the estate's skylights in pale sheets, Ava called an early meeting. The board, she explained, wanted a public demonstration of Lily's progress, something to reassure investors that the family, and by extension the company, was stable. I'll control the environment, Ava said, more to herself than to them. Minimal crew, soft lighting, no surprises. Marcus's chest tightened. Lily's not ready for something like that. She won't be alone, Ava replied, though her eyes flickered with doubt. We'll make it gentle, short, safe. But Ethan, standing in the corner with a tablet tucked under his arm, smiled in that thin, polite way that always carried the scent of buried intentions. It's already scheduled, he said, tapping his screen. Press invites have gone out. Investors are expecting this. Backing out would look unstable. Ava's jaw clenched. She hated being boxed in, cornered by optics. Fine, but everything happens on my terms. Ethan nodded. Of course, Ava. He didn't mean it. The morning of the live stream, Marcus felt uneasy from the moment he stepped through the employee entrance. Something about the air felt wrong, colder, sharper, as if the house itself was bracing for impact. He found Ava pacing near the private elevator, a tightness in her shoulders he hadn't seen since the gala. Tell me everything is set, she demanded when Ethan arrived. Absolutely, he said with a polished smile. Room A3, the sensory studio. Sound dampened. Controlled lighting. Marcus frowned. A 3? That's not the room we discussed. Ethan raised an eyebrow. There was a last-minute scheduling conflict. This is the only space available. Something in Marcus's stomach dropped. A 3 was smaller, brighter, busier. The overhead lights buzzed faintly when warming, barely perceptible to most, but not to children like Lily. Ava hesitated. We should reschedule. And tell the board you're not confident in your daughter's progress, Ethan countered smoothly. Ava, this is goodwill. This stability. Investors depend on that. We all do. Marcus didn't like it. Every instinct in him screamed against it. But Ava, under pressure, exhausted, still clinging to the memory of Lily saying her first full sentence 2 days ago, exhaled and nodded. Fine, she whispered. Ethan's smile widened by a fraction. Excellent. Let's begin. The new studio was already crowded when they arrived. Technicians, lighting crew, sound engineers, assistants. Much more than Ava had approved. Harsh white lights hung overhead, buzzing faintly like angry insects. Cameras were being tested, filling the air with sharp beeps. The floor smelled of fresh paint and disinfectant. It was everything Lily feared. The moment they stepped inside, Lily stiffened. Her hands curled inward. Her breathing quickened. Marcus, Ava whispered, fear creeping into her voice. She's escalating. I can calm her, Marcus said, stepping forward. But 2 security guards moved in front of him. Orders from Mr. Kensington, one said. Only approved personnel on set. She needs him, Ava snapped. Let him through. But before she could finish, a producer shouted, We're live in 30 seconds! Panic flashed across Ava's face. Ethan, what are you doing? It'll be fine, Ethan replied smoothly. Just trust the process. Marcus tried to push past the guards. She's not ready for this. Move, please. Sir, do not step forward again, one warned. We will escort you out. Marcus! Ava yelled, reaching toward him. But it was too late. Going live in 3, 2... The lights flared to full brightness, and Lily shattered. Her scream tore through the studio like the sound of glass exploding. Cameras jerked. Crew members stumbled back. She dropped to the concrete, hands clamped to her temples, rocking so violently her hair whipped across her face. Stop the lights! Ava yelled. Turn them down! Turn them! But the technicians were frozen, unsure, untrained for this kind of crisis. Marcus lunged again, desperation overtaking caution. Let me through! She's panicking! The guards restrained him, dragging him backward. Sir, you need to calm down. But he couldn't calm down, not while Lily's cries turned into gasping sobs. Not while she tried to crawl away from the noise and light. Not while she looked desperately toward the door, as if searching for the one person barred from helping her. Then it happened. Lily stumbled over a thick studio cable. Her foot slipped. She crashed headfirst into the corner of a metal equipment cart. The sound wasn't loud, but the sight of the bright red trickle down her forehead froze the entire room. Even the cameras went still. Ava's scream filled the space, raw, guttural. Lily! The live stream ended in chaos. Crew members swarmed Lily. Security dragged Marcus from the room. Ava knelt on the floor, cradling her daughter, her trembling hand smeared with blood as she whispered apologies into curls gone damp with tears. But the damage had already been done. Within an hour, clips from the live stream leaked. Within 3 hours, every major tech blog ran a headline questioning Ava's competence. By evening, parents' groups were condemning the Kensingtons. And late that night, Marcus received the call that broke him. His mother-in-law's lawyer had filed an emergency petition. Footage clearly showed he was absent from his responsibilities, that he placed himself in a role unfit for someone with a vulnerable child, that he put another child's needs above his own. The court agreed. He had 48 hours to surrender Caleb. Marcus stood in his dim apartment, the city hum pressing against the weak window panes. Caleb slept on the couch, curled into a small bundle beneath his blanket. Marcus pressed a hand to his own chest. This time there was no steady rhythm, only the hollow crumble of a man losing the one thing he lived for. And somewhere in the silent halls of the Kensington estate, Lily stared at the door of the sensory room, waiting for someone who would not come. Because Ethan had won his first battle, but it would not be his last. The decision from the court came written in the cold, clipped language of legal documents, words that didn't tremble, didn't soften, didn't care whom they cut. By the time Marcus finished reading the emergency custody order, his hands were shaking so hard he nearly dropped the paper. He had 48 hours left with his son. 48 hours to say goodbye. 48 hours to pretend he wasn't breaking apart inside. Caleb, unaware of the storm destroying the fragile structure of their life, sat cross-legged on the living room rug, lining up his toy cars in a perfect symmetrical loop. He hummed softly, lost in his own gentle world. The late afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, striping the carpet with warm gold bars. Marcus knelt beside him. "Buddy," he whispered, trying to keep his voice from shaking. "Can you look at me?" Caleb didn't. Not at first. He finished straightening the last car, then finally lifted his eyes, wide, trusting, unaware that everything was about to change. "Yes, Dad?" Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came out. His throat closed, thick and burning. He swallowed once, twice, fighting the rising wave of grief. He forced himself to take a steady breath. "Grandma Denise wants you to stay with her. Just for a little while." Caleb blinked. "Why?" Marcus's heart cracked clean through. Why? Such a small word. Such a heavy answer. "Some people think I might need help taking care of you," Marcus said carefully. "But they're wrong. And I'm going to fix it. I promise you. I'm going to fix everything." Caleb frowned, confusion furrowing his little brow. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," Marcus said quickly, voice breaking. No, Caleb. You didn't do anything wrong. This isn't your fault, not even a little." He pulled his son into his arms, holding him tightly, inhaling the soft scent of shampoo and laundry soap and the life he was terrified of losing. Caleb melted against him, fragile and warm, trusting him with the kind of faith only children possess. And Marcus knew with sick certainty, if he lost Caleb, he would never recover. Across the bay, the Kensington estate had gone silent. Lily hadn't spoken since the live stream. She hadn't hummed. She hadn't traced her soft looping patterns on the floor. She hadn't slept without crying. She sat curled in the sensory room corner, clutching the small river stone she had once handed to Caleb. She didn't look up when people entered, didn't respond to her nannies, didn't even reach for her mother. Ava watched her through the observation window, her hands trembling as they rested against the glass. She had spent millions on specialists, had read every study, had forced Lily through treatment after treatment, trying to unlock the door to her daughter's world. But Marcus had opened that door simply by seeing Lily for who she was, and now he was gone. Ava pressed her forehead to the cool glass. "Baby, I'm so sorry," she whispered. Lily didn't move. Ava wiped her eyes harshly. She was Ava Kensington, tech visionary, media mogul, the woman investors whispered about in admiration and fear. She led companies. She won negotiations. She rebuilt markets. But she couldn't reach her own child. And she couldn't undo the damage done the moment Ethan convinced her to go through with that live stream. Her phone buzzed. She almost didn't look. When she did, her stomach dropped. Urgent update. Emergency custody ruling granted. Child to be transferred within 48 hours. Petition filed using Kensington livestream footage as evidence. Ava sank down into the nearest chair, shock hollowing her chest. Ethan hadn't just undermined her. He had destroyed Marcus. He had torn apart a father and his child. And worst of all, she had let him. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." She stood abruptly, almost stumbling. She grabbed her coat, ignoring her assistant calling after her. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to see Marcus, to explain, to apologize, to fix something she herself had broken. But as she reached the elevator, Ethan stepped out from another hallway, phone in hand. "Ava," he said calmly, "we need to talk about the investor fallout." She stared at him with a look so sharp it could have carved bone. "You," she whispered, "did this." Ethan blinked with practiced innocence. "I merely ensured the company's reputation." "Stop!" Her voice cracked like thunder. "You risked Lily. You risked Marcus. You risked everything." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I did what you were too emotional to do." The elevator doors slid closed in her face as he stepped inside, shutting her out with a cold finality. And for the first time, Ava realized her brother wasn't just interfering. He was dismantling her life, one decision at a time. Night fell over Oakland like a heavy blanket. Marcus sat on the edge of Caleb's bed, watching his son sleep for what might be the last time in a long while. Outside, a train rumbled past, shaking the window. Caleb didn't stir, too exhausted from the tears he'd cried earlier. Marcus laid a hand on his son's back, feeling the rise and fall of each little breath. "I'm not giving you up," he whispered. "I'm not losing you. Not again." His phone buzzed once. A message. From Ava. "Marcus, please. I found out what happened. Please let me explain." He stared at the screen, jaw tight. She had promised support. She had promised safety. She had promised she understood. But promises didn't matter now. Not when he was hours away from losing the only person he had left in this world. He turned off the phone. Then he lay down beside Caleb, holding him through the long, aching night. Because in the morning, he would have to let go. And he didn't know if he had the strength to survive it. The sun rose quietly over Oakland, but nothing about the morning felt gentle. Pale light filtered through the blinds, settling across the room where Caleb still slept pressed against Marcus's side. Marcus hadn't closed his eyes once. He memorized every detail of his son's face, the tiny scar above his eyebrow, the curl of hair that always fell across his forehead, the way his fingers twitched softly in sleep. A knock sounded on his apartment door around 8 a.m., a quiet, hesitant knock, not the harsh, impatient rhythm of the sheriff or the court officer. Marcus carefully slid off the bed, tucking the blanket around Caleb before stepping into the living room. He opened the door. Ava Kensington stood there, not in her flawless CEO wardrobe, not in heels, not wrapped in the armor of someone used to bending the world to her will. She stood in jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back hastily, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. For the first time, she looked like a mother, lost, frightened, desperate. "Marcus," she whispered. He froze, one hand gripping the edge of the door, the other curling slowly into a fist. "What are you doing here?" Ava swallowed. I had to see you. I had to tell you the truth." "About what?" Marcus asked flatly. "About how I'm losing my son because of your world? Because you forced Lily into something she wasn't ready for? Because your brother—" "It wasn't an accident," Ava cut in. Her voice trembled. "None of it was." Marcus stared at her. "I went through Ethan's messages," she continued. "His emails, his meeting logs. I matched timestamps with the studio footage and the room schedules." Her voice cracked, and she pressed a hand to her forehead as if holding herself together by force. "He sabotaged everything. He changed the filming room. He planted the idea of a public broadcast. He sent the footage to your mother-in-law's lawyer. He coordinated everything with her behind my back." Each word dropped between them like a lead weight. Marcus felt the floor tilt under his feet. "Why?" he whispered. "Because he wanted me gone," Ava said, her voice barely audible. "He wanted the board to question my leadership. He wanted to paint me as unstable. And you—" her eyes glistened. "You were a tool he could use to make that happen." Marcus staggered back, leaning against the doorframe as anger, disbelief, and betrayal washed over him all at once. "So he used my son," Marcus said slowly, voice trembling. "He used my family. He used my daughter," Ava whispered. "He risked her safety. He risked everything for control." Silence filled the hallway, thick and crushing. A streetlight flickered outside, though the sun was already rising, the neon still glowing against the gray morning, washing the world in a strange mix of past and present, of hope and ruin. Ava took a shaky breath. "Marcus, I know you have no reason to trust me. I know I failed you when you needed me, but I'm asking you for one thing." She stepped closer. "Help me stop him." Marcus let out a bitter laugh, quiet, pained. "Why would I help you now?" Ava's voice softened into something he had never heard from her, vulnerability stripped bare. "Because you're the only person who can," she whispered. "And because I owe you the truth and justice." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, thick, heavy, filled with printed messages and timestamps. She held it out to him with both hands. "This is everything, every lie, every manipulation, every piece of evidence tying Ethan to your custody case and Lily's live stream incident." Marcus didn't take it. "What am I supposed to do with this?" he asked. "Fight," Ava said simply. "Fight for your son. And let me fight beside you." Her voice wavered. "Please, Marcus, I need you to help me make this right. Not for me, for Lily, for Caleb, for both of our children." He turned away, pacing the length of his small living room. His chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven breaths. He had spent his whole life trying not to ask for help, trying to hold everything together alone, trying to prove he was enough. And yet, here was a woman who could buy half the city begging him for forgiveness, asking him to help her do the one thing she'd never succeeded at: save her child. He stopped pacing. He looked at her, and something inside him cracked. Not entirely forgiveness, not yet, but something close to a beginning. "What would you need me to do?" he asked quietly. Ava exhaled so hard she trembled. "Come with me. Right now. We're calling an emergency board meeting. I'll present the evidence. But your testimony, your clarity about what happened with Lily and Caleb will prove my case." "So this is about saving your job?" Marcus asked, voice hardening. Ava shook her head fiercely. "No, this is about protecting Lily, about stopping Ethan before he does something worse. And it's about helping you win your son back." The mention of Caleb shattered the last piece of Marcus's resistance. He looked into the bedroom where his son still slept, small and peaceful, and entirely unaware of the storm ripping through their lives. He turned back to Ava. "Give me 2 minutes," he said. Ava nodded, shoulders sagging with relief. When Marcus stepped into the bedroom and looked at his son one last time before the fight ahead, he whispered, "I'm coming for you, buddy. I'm going to fix this. I promise." He returned to the doorway with the folder in hand, his jaw set, his eyes no longer defeated. Ava met his gaze. "Are you ready?" she asked. "No," he said honestly, "but I'm going anyway." Together, they stepped into the neon-lit morning. Two broken parents, united by the children they loved, walking toward the war that would either save everything or destroy what little they had left. The ride back to San Francisco felt nothing like the other trips Marcus had taken into the city. The morning light cut across the bay like a blade, sharp, cold, metallic. Ava drove in silence, her knuckles pale as she gripped the steering wheel. Marcus stared out the passenger window, watching the skyline rise and swell like a world he had never belonged to. But today, he wasn't walking into that world alone, and he wasn't walking in as a man unseen. Ava guided the car beneath the towering glass structure of Kensington Technologies, her breaths shallow and controlled. Security cleared them instantly. The elevators opened for her without needing a swipe. But as they ascended, Marcus noticed her shoulders tightening, inch by inch. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked softly. Ava let out a breath that trembled at the end. "No, but Lily deserves a mother who stops running from hard things." She paused. "And Caleb deserves a father who isn't punished for doing the right thing." Marcus nodded, gratitude catching in his throat. The elevator doors opened on the executive floor, where sleek hallways shimmered under recessed lighting. Board members were already gathering, murmuring in low voices. Suits, expensive colognes, tight-clipped smiles, an entire world built on image. Yet today, something different lay beneath the polished surface. Tension. Ava's assistant approached quickly. "Ms. Kensington, everyone is in the conference room. Mr. Kensington arrived early." Ava's jaw tightened. Of course he did. As they walked, Marcus felt every gaze slide over him, confused, dismissive, curious, but he held his ground. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He was here for his son, and for a little girl who had reached for his hand when the world terrified her. The conference room doors slid open. Inside sat 12 board members arranged in a perfect arc, tablets glowing, expressions neutral. At the head of the table, Ethan Kensington leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, a faint, nearly triumphant smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Ava," he greeted smoothly. "You called this emergency session. I assume you have a plan to explain yesterday's PR disaster." Ava didn't answer immediately. Instead, she placed a heavy folder on the table, the one she had shown Marcus earlier. Printed messages, forged scheduling changes, timestamps that matched the live stream chaos to Ethan's directives. The room quieted. "This," Ava said, voice controlled, "is what really happened." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't tremble. She didn't hide. She simply told the truth. She described the sabotage, the deliberate change to the filming room, the unauthorized press circulation, the quiet coordination with Marcus's mother-in-law's lawyer. She revealed screenshots, forwarded messages, digital logs, all traced back to Ethan's company phone. The board members leaned forward, the weight of the evidence sinking deeper with each page they scanned. Ethan's smooth composure fractured. "This is absurd," he barked. "Fabricated. You think I would risk the well-being of a child? Of my niece?" Ava's gaze sharpened. "You already did." The boardroom fell into a heavy silence. Then Ava looked at Marcus. "Tell them what you witnessed that day." Marcus felt every eye turn to him. He took a slow breath, grounding himself the way he did for Caleb. Then he stepped forward. "My name is Marcus Hill," he began. "I'm not a specialist, not a doctor. I'm a night shift cook. But I know what it looks like when a child is overwhelmed. I know what it's like to see the world hit too hard and too fast. He described Lily's meltdown, the change in environment, the bright lights, the noise, the way she had reached for him for comfort. But he'd been held back. Not because she didn't need him, but because someone had decided he didn't belong there. I couldn't get to her, Marcus said, voice thickening. And she got hurt because of it. He paused. My own son was taken from me because of that footage. My parenting was judged based on a situation I wasn't allowed to stop. A board member shifted uncomfortably. Another rubbed her forehead. The truth had a way of unsettling even the most hardened executives. Then Ava spoke again, more softly this time. Lily stopped speaking after the incident. She hasn't connected with anyone since Marcus left. My daughter is suffering, and the person responsible sits at this table pretending to protect our family when all he did was weaponize it. Ethan rose abruptly. This is a smear job. I won't sit here and... One board member, a man in his 60s with calm eyes, interrupted him. We have the metadata, Ethan, he said quietly. We verified it during the testimony. Another nodded. The evidence is clear. A third leaned back, exhaling. You endangered the company. Worse, you endangered a child. Ethan's face drained of color. A vote was called. It wasn't close. Unanimous. Ethan Kensington was removed from his role effective immediately, pending internal investigation. Security was summoned. He didn't fight. He didn't argue. He only cast a venomous glance toward Marcus and a burning one toward his sister before he was escorted out. The moment the doors closed behind him, the room exhaled. But it wasn't over. There was still the custody hearing. Just after noon, Ava and Marcus hurried across town to the family courthouse. The building wasn't glamorous. Cracked concrete steps, vending machines humming in the hallway, the faint smell of stale coffee lingering in the air. But inside these worn walls, lives were remade or broken apart every day. Marcus's attorney, arranged at the last minute by Ava, met them in the lobby. A confident woman with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, she extended her hand. I'm Sarah Mitchell, she said. Let's go get your son back. The hearing room was small, intimate. Denise sat at the opposite table, hands folded neatly, worry carving lines into her face. When her eyes met Marcus's, something softened. She didn't look like an enemy, just a grandmother who believed she was doing the right thing. The judge entered, papers shuffled, voices echoed. Sarah presented everything. The sabotage, the falsified narrative, the messages tying Ethan to the custody petition, proof that Marcus hadn't abandoned his son. He'd been prevented from helping a child who needed him. When Denise realized the truth, what she'd been manipulated into believing, tears welled in her eyes. I didn't know, she whispered. Marcus, I never wanted to hurt you. I thought Caleb needed something you couldn't give him. Marcus felt a sting in his chest. Not anger, but sorrow. I know, he said softly, but he needs his dad. The judge looked at Marcus for a long moment. Mr. Hill, she said, it is clear the previous ruling was based on misrepresented information. Therefore, I am restoring full custody to you effective immediately. Marcus's vision blurred. He heard the words, really heard them, only when Sarah squeezed his shoulder and whispered, It's over. You won. He stepped into the afternoon sunlight, barely able to breathe. And then, Dad? He turned. There stood Caleb, small backpack hanging off one shoulder, eyes bright, running toward him with arms wide. Marcus dropped to his knees. Caleb collided into his embrace, and the world, broken, loud, difficult, finally felt right again. Ava watched from a few steps away, tears slipping down her cheeks, unnoticed and unhidden. Because for the first time in a long time, she was witnessing a victory that mattered, not for shareholders, not for headlines, but for a father and a son who had survived the storm. And in her heart, a quiet truth took root. Maybe this was the beginning of healing for all of them. The courthouse steps were still warm beneath the late afternoon sun as families drifted by, some celebrating, some weeping, some simply relieved their long day was done. But for Marcus, time had slowed into something soft and golden. He lifted Caleb into his arms and breathed deeply, letting the child's familiar weight settle into the place that had ached for days. Caleb held on tightly, his cheek pressed into Marcus's shoulder. "I missed you, Dad." Those 4 words nearly undid him. "I missed you more, buddy." A few steps away, Ava stood quietly, her hands clasped, sunglasses hiding the brightness in her eyes. She didn't want to intrude on this moment, but Marcus turned toward her, his voice gentle. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." Ava exhaled, the tension in her shoulders finally releasing. "You don't owe me thanks. I owed you the truth." She paused. "I owed Lily the truth." "That too," Marcus said, with a faint smile. A car horn blared from the street, jerking him back to reality. Caleb winced at the noise, burying deeper into his father's chest. Marcus instinctively rocked him, humming softly, a habit born of countless nights spent soothing his son through storms only he could feel. Ava watched, her expression softening with something Marcus didn't quite recognize at first. Admiration. "You're good with him," she murmured. Marcus shrugged. "We figured each other out. Took time, but we did." "I'd like to learn how to do that," Ava said quietly, almost to herself, "with Lily." And it was then that Marcus noticed the exhaustion behind her eyes, the weight she carried not as a CEO, not as the daughter of a legacy family, but simply as a mother who loved her child and had no idea how to reach her. He nodded slowly. "You will. Lily's not broken. She just needs someone patient enough to meet her where she is." Ava looked away, blinking quickly. They parted outside the courthouse, but not completely. Ava lingered for a moment, something unsaid hanging in the air. "Marcus, I want to give you something," she said. He frowned. "I don't need anything." "I know," she replied softly. "That's why this matters." She pulled out a small envelope and held it out. "It's not money. It's something for later, when you're ready." He didn't take it. "Ava, open it when it feels right," she said, slipping it into his hoodie pocket before he could protest. "Not before." And with that, she stepped back, giving him and Caleb their space at last. That evening, Marcus drove Caleb home. The city blurred past the windows, billboards glowing, neon signs flickering awake, people hurriedly crossing streets as twilight settled. Oakland looked different now, as if the world had shifted by a degree, revealing a new angle Marcus had never seen before. When they arrived at their apartment building, Caleb tugged his sleeve. "Dad, can we go to the park? The little one? I want to show you something." Marcus hesitated. Caleb was still recovering, and he was exhausted too. But his son's eyes held a light he hadn't seen all week, so he nodded. The park was small and tucked between 2 aging apartment blocks, its swings creaking softly in the evening breeze. The lampposts buzzed with warm amber light, casting long familiar shadows across the cracked pavement. Caleb ran ahead, laughter fluttering behind him like the first sign of spring breaking through winter ice. And then Marcus saw her. Lily. She stood near the swings, pale hair touched by the lamplight, hands gently clutching something small. She looked up when she heard Caleb's footsteps and didn't flinch, didn't retreat. Instead, she stepped forward, just one small, brave step. Behind her, breathless and stunned, was Ava. "I didn't tell her we were coming here," she whispered to Marcus. "She asked to go outside. That's never happened before." Lily reached Caleb and held out her hand. In her palm was a tiny, smooth stone, pink with white streaks through it. Caleb took it reverently, eyes wide. "It means hi," Ava whispered. "She uses stones for greetings." Marcus swallowed the sudden tightness in his throat. Caleb, understanding with the pure intuition only children seem to have, reached into his pocket and pulled out a small blue marble, a treasure he never parted with. He placed it gently in Lily's hand. The two children stood there under the lamplight, exchanging their silent hellos, the world around them softening into something impossibly tender. And for the first time since the gala, Lily smiled, a small, fleeting, precious smile. Ava gasped, covering her mouth. Marcus looked at her and saw something he hadn't realized until now. She wasn't just seeking forgiveness. She was seeking a way forward. The evening breeze carried the faint scent of jasmine from a neighbor's balcony. The swings creaked. A siren wailed somewhere in the distance. Life, with all its noise and struggle, kept moving. But in that small park, time seemed to pause. Ava stepped closer to Marcus. "I resigned," she said quietly. He turned to her. "Today? An hour ago, I emailed the board. I told them Lily comes first now." She let out a breath that shook. "I'm done choosing the company over my daughter." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's a big step. It's the right one." She looked at him with a gentleness he hadn't seen before. "Thank you for helping me see that." Marcus shifted, uncomfortable with praise. "You figured it out yourself." Ava's gaze dropped to the ground. "Maybe, but you gave me the courage." He didn't answer. Not because he didn't want to, but because the moment didn't need words. They watched the children swing gently, side by side, their laughter carrying into the night like tiny lanterns. And then, remembering the envelope, Marcus pulled it from his pocket. Ava stiffened, suddenly nervous. He opened it. Inside was a letter of reference, signed by Ava, notarized by the company, stating in clear, unwavering terms that Marcus Hill had saved her daughter's life, fought for her well-being, and demonstrated extraordinary compassion, skill, and integrity. At the bottom was a single handwritten line: "For whatever comes next, a K." Marcus folded the letter carefully, his heart fuller than he ever expected it could be. "Thank you," he whispered. Ava smiled softly. "It's the least I could do." Lily and Caleb laughed again as the swings tipped higher under the warm glow of the lamppost. Two children who had been hurt by the world, finding healing in each other. Two parents who had nearly lost everything, finding hope in the quiet spaces between the chaos. And in that tiny Oakland park, beneath the soft hum of streetlights and the rustle of evening wind, something like a family began to form. A family no one had expected. A family stitched together by kindness, forgiveness, and second chances. And for the first time in a very long time, Marcus let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, miracles didn't have to be loud. Sometimes they were small, sometimes they were quiet. But they were real, and they were enough. If this story touched something in you, drop a simple 1 in the comments. It's easy, and it lets me know you're here with us. And if you'd like more stories of quiet strength, second chances, and the kind of kindness that can change a life, make sure to subscribe. There's another story waiting for you, and I'd be honored to share it.